let's get this show on the road. Hello, everyone. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, and this is the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast, number 28. And this is the one about Jeet Kune and old school Gung Fu family traditions. All right. So we'll go old school. We'll talk a little bit about this stuff because a lot of the Jeet Kune, the I Love Jeet Kune members are kind of old school Gung Fu type people, and some of them are older guys who've been training in the art for a while, or who have been fans or followers of Bruce Lee and JKD for a long time. So we're gonna go back and take a little look at what was introduced to the world by the Hong Kong cinema of the 1970s and people like Bruce Lee when Kung Fu films became a worldwide phenomenon, right? So what we're talking about is let's call it the values, right, that old school Kung Fu movies taught. So recently we had an I Love Jeet Kune broadcast where we talked about why Bruce Lee was a great role model for people around the world, and we talked about his tremendous work ethic and about the fact that he trained religiously, almost every day, right? And then just last week we talked about how to apply the Jeet Kune philosophy outside of martial arts. So we'll take a look today and see if we can wrap these things into a neat little package, right? So you'll remember that in the early days of martial art in the United States, to the best of my knowledge, the stuff that American servicemen brought over from the Orient, right, was mostly about like secret fighting tips and self-defense tricks, right? But when people like, so now I'll drop some names and see who has tuned in that's on board with me. So when people like Chen Sing, like Chen Quan Tai, like Chi Quan Chun, Fu Sheng, Meng Fi, David Chang, when those people came along and they started to teach us about Shaolin, then things kind of took on a whole new meaning, right? Because with the Shaolin Kung Fu, we were, and when I say we, I was still living in Barbados at the time, so I was a skinny little 8-year-old Kung Fu fanatic, right, down in the islands. And so we were transported to a place where training Shaolin was about being virtuous, about being honorable, being focused and principled and purposeful. And so we learned through those movies about being righteous and about fighting for the right reasons, right? Now, granted, in those movies, there was always a whole lot of revenge, right? But it was always kind of like justifiable revenge, right? And when we were talking about Bruce Lee's work ethic, you're probably aware that not always did Bruce Lee have a training partner, right? Not always did Bruce Lee have somebody to work out with. As a matter of fact, that's why Herb Jackson, I think, was the guy that built a lot of training equipment for Bruce Lee so that he would have something on which or with which to work when he was doing his solo practice, right? So there was a tremendous amount of solo training that Bruce Lee engaged in, which is why I always caution people when they talk about how, about the problems that they're having with training. I know that it's harder for a lot of people to envision themselves getting any good in the art of Jeet Kune without having somebody to train. So I always recommend that you get at least one training partner. But there's still a lot of stuff that you can develop when you train solo if you've got the right equipment and that type of thing, right? So that's kind of like the first point that I wanted to bring up, and it'll just be a couple points about old school Kung Fu, right? So you'll remember that the words Kung Fu or Kung Fu, if you do the Mandarin pronunciation, that the words themselves do not translate to mean martial art or fighting style or anything like that, right? You'd have to look at Kuoshu or Gyoshu, which means I think that means national art, right? And then you'd have to look at Chuan Fa or Kyun Fa or Quan Shu, and those kind of mean fist method or the fist art or what have you. So those would actually be better translations for fighting, right? For Chinese martial art fighting. And then there's the ever popular term wushu, which is war or martial art, literally, or national art, right? No, not national art, right? Although the modern version of wushu that's been exported and introduced around the world is kind of been modified into more of like a gymnastic or sport or performing art. So it doesn't have a whole lot of, a lot of the fighting application isn't maintained in modern day wushu, right? But still, when you watch them, or when you watch the wushu stuff being choreographed into martial art films, I don't know about you, but I still fantasize about being able to move like a lot of those people and having that kind of skill, right? So actually then, the words kung fu or gung fu translate to mean essentially acquired skill. It can be read to mean work performed, special skills, strength, ability, or even time spent, right? So acquired skill, work performed, special skill, strength, ability, or time spent. I've even heard that the individual characters can make the translation thing more interesting, because the characters for Gung Fu can be translated as time and work, right? So Fu meaning time and, and Gong meaning work. And then when you look even more deeply into the characters, then you find that Gong can mean merit or achievement, and then the character for Fu can mean big, right? As in important. You see? So you keep in mind that when you take Chinese characters, I imagine the same thing applies to like Japanese and Korean, right? When you combine two characters, then they can take on a brand new meaning. So then the actual meaning of Kung Fu can refer to anyone of achievement, and also it can refer to the effort that one puts into garnering that achievement, if that makes sense. So the effort that we put into self-mastery through the practice of Jeet Kune is then quite akin to the effort that for the education of a doctor or a lawyer or an architect or something, right? Which is why, I'll touch on this just for a second. That's why the idea that a professional Jeet Kune instructor is somebody who should do it for free is ridiculous, because the same amount of time, the same amount of commitment, the same amount of energy is invested in becoming a skilled Jeet Kune instructor as is invested in becoming a skilled practitioner of any other art, right? Be it the medical art, right, or the legal art, okay? So, the Gung Fu effort, old school Gung Fu effort, applies to the training, the discipline, the commitment of even, Olympic athletes, right? Essentially anybody of great achievement. I read this somewhere, it's the principle of what you put into it is what you get out of it, right? It's that principle in action. So skill acquired through hard work and practice, right? So let's talk about some of the other qualities that are achieved through this hard work and practice, right? So they're all, when I tease the kids in my junior Jeet Kune program, right? I tease them that they're all bad words for them, because it's words like discipline, perseverance, dedication, persistence, right? Which are not too popular terms especially in today's, fast-paced technological thing. I mean, I'm shooting this video on my camcorder, my big camera, and also on the iPhone, right? So I mean, literally, people have access to the world in the palm of their hands because of today's technology. So discipline and perseverance and dedication and persistence, sometimes those things kind of fall out of favor, right? So that's why, actually, I'll caution you on this, right? So those of you on this broadcast with me who are practicing Jeet Kune or practitioner, you know, or even, I mean, it doesn't even have to be Jeet Kune. But if as a martial artist, you find that sometimes you feel like when you're out with family and friends who are not martial artists, and you feel like you don't really fit in, like you don't really belong, that is why. You see, because discipline and dedication and perseverance and persistence, those are words by which you live because of your practice as a martial artist. Other people, maybe not so much, right? So just rest assured that there are other weirdos out there like you, right? And don't feel so bad when you feel out of sorts with these people, right? So let's go back to the huge amounts of solo practice in which Bruce Lee engaged, right? So this discipline of solo training, this ability to practice by yourself, my contention is that this is what can lead to really high levels of self-dependence, right? Which is, to me, is a little bit different from independence, all right? Now, if you remember some of the great Shaolin movies from yesteryear, you recall that a lot of times the hero would spend months, if not years, right, training, sometimes by himself up in the mountain, right, in order to then finally descend from the mountain and right the wrongs that had been committed, you know, like the murder of his master or something, right? So and then the other thing, I couldn't remember which Jackie Chan movie it was, but I didn't have time to look it up. But in some of the movies, you see that apparently in old China, the parent would take the kids to the master's school and then literally leave them there to be taught everything that they needed, right? As a matter of fact, I believe that is, when it comes to the Chinese opera, I believe that is actually how Jackie Chan grew up, right? As a ward of the Chinese opera, right? So I take it that that's why you can see this whole idea of people bringing their kids and leaving them there is where in Chinese martial art, the term Sifu or Shifu can be interpreted to mean not just teacher, but also father, because you end up having, to a certain degree, you end up having to take care of these people, right? So the schools, the hierarchy in a martial arts school, in a Jeet Kune school, right, is very evident, because you can see, I'll point it out to you this way, right? So in the early days of Jeet Kune, the structure of the school, so you have the Sifu and then you have the older brothers, because remember that in traditional Gung Fu, they didn't have, they had more family titles, which is why I'm talking about family traditions. So you had the teacher, and then you had the older brother or the Sihing, right? Then you had, so you had the Sifu and the Sihing at the top, and then everybody else kind of pyramids down from there, right? In the early days of Jeet Kune, that structure was very evident, because as Bruce Lee's lieutenant in Los Angeles, right, Dan Inosanto was technically, in terms of lineage, he was the Sihing, but he was really, because he taught 90% of the classes, he was actually the Sifu at the Chinatown school, right? And Bruce Lee then would be the Gung, right? So let me do this over. So at the top, right? And actually there is a page, but since I didn't look it up, I won't try to reference it. But in the Art and Philosophy book, there is a picture that explains this, right? So at the top, based on where you come into the family. So for everybody, Bruce Lee is the Sijo. That is the clan elder, right? The leader of the clan. So Bruce Lee is everybody's Sijo. Because Dan Inosanto is my Sifu, that makes Bruce Lee my Sigung. So Dan Inosanto is my father, and Bruce Lee is my grandfather, right? Which makes me then a Toisin, a grandson of Bruce Lee, right? The point that I was making about this is because even in one of his famous articles, right, Bruce Lee talked about the people who were certified by him as instructors, right? So he lists them in chronological order, with Taki Kimura, who was his number one guy from the Seattle era, right? Then the number two being James Lee, his friend and mentor from Oakland, and then Inosanto, who was his number one guy in Los Angeles, right? And in, let's see, it was 1997, in a Black Belt article, Sifu Dan, he was answering a question about who was still alive. And Dan Inosanto said that Taki was Bruce Lee's most senior student. So I'm going to quote this, right? Taki was Bruce Lee's most senior student in Seattle. Bruce trusted and respected him. Bruce would often remind me Inosanto, that no matter how much I learned, Taki was still my senior and should always be paid the respect that goes with that seniority. Bruce could be quite traditional at times, especially when it came to titles of respect. So if you really get this, what you'll observe that what's being taught here, by extension, is an automatic respect for your elders, which again is a virtue that might be a little bit lacking in modern society, if you get what I mean, right? So that's why when I had the big school, part of the agreement that especially the little students had to sign was it was an agreement which says in part, I will always treat, it was part of the student creed, but it said, I will always treat my parents and brothers and or sisters with courtesy and respect, right? Because it's old school Gung Fu tradition. It's stuff that people don't necessarily portray. I mean, look, in today's martial art world, right? Let me beat up on Joe Rogan a little bit. So Joe Rogan is probably one of the most prominent martial artists in our modern era. He's got, a very popular podcast. But not too often when it comes to talking about martial art, it's about the fighting competition and who's a butt kicker and who's tremendous and whatever. Now, that's not to slight Joe in any way. I watch his program almost every day. I enjoy the heck out of it, right? But this by contrast, when I talk about martial art, when I talk about Jeet Kune here, what I want to do is to show how it is not just a vehicle for your physical development. It is a vehicle for your psychological and spiritual and mental development also, right? Okay, so I wanted to finish this up with kind of a mini analysis of Bruce Lee's movies to show how he tried to put virtue into all of his on-screen roles, right? So the Big Boss. Actually, I got to show you guys something. I went through storage right today, right? You see these things here? So which one's this? Which one's this? Fist of Fury, right? You'll notice that these things still have the shrink wrap on them because what they are it's whatever the version is that does not play too well in America. I bought these things simply because they existed, right? So here's the Enter the Dragon one. I don't really count Game of Death as a Bruce Lee movie, right? I mean, I know it is, but anyhow, you get what I mean, right? So in The Big Boss, Bruce Lee's character has made a promise to not fight, and it's only after the symbol of that promise is literally broken, right? So it was the little jade necklace that he wore. When that is literally broken, then he unleashes his fury on the bad guys, right? In Fist of Fury starts out with him returning home to discover that his teacher has passed away. And then he discovers that he might have been murdered at the hands of the treacherous Japanese. So then he launches his own investigation, right? Which leads us to the famous dojo fight scene where I think we were introduced to the nunchaku for the first time. I could be wrong on that, but I think that was when Bruce Lee introduced the world to the tapak tuyok, right? Way of the Dragon is more treachery, but it's the in comparison, the little unassuming Chinese country bumpkin coming to the assistance of his people in Europe, right? And ends up, being the small fry, but he outsmarts and ultimately outfights the bigger European bad guys. And then that brings us full circle back to Shaolin, because in Enter the Dragon, his character is sent to restore honor to the Shaolin Temple by facing off against a renegade Shaolin monk, right? So this is how Bruce Lee tried to inject virtue into the roles that his character played, right? So let me see. I got a couple more minutes, so I'll go through a little bit more of the Gung Fu family terms, right? So we talked about Sijo, the clan elder. So for everybody, Bruce Lee is the Sijo. Now, depending on where you come into the Jeet Kune Do family, Bruce Lee could be your Si Gung, or he could be your Si Tai Gung. So for my students, for my student Wayne in Barbados, I am his student's Si Gung because he is their Sifu, which makes Dan and Asano their Si Tai Gung, right? Which makes Bruce Lee then Sijo. So it all depends on where you come in. Right? We talked about Si Hing, which is the older brother. So the term younger brother is not that often used, and that is Si Dai. Oh, Ray is reminding me about the shirt thing, and Jenny will kill me if I don't show you guys what it is. I think I've worn this one before. Thanks, Ray. good looking out. Right? Okay, so there is the term Si Dai, which is the younger brother. So that's anybody who comes in to the art, comes into the family after you. The female member is your oh shoot, let me not get this wrong. Simui, right, is your younger sister, right? So you have Si Hing is the older brother, anybody who came into the art. So for me, my Si Hings would be people like Chris Kent, Tim Tackett, Cass Magda, right? Jeff Amada, those kind of people. Those are my Si Hing. Those are my older brothers. My Si Mui would be somebody like Levon Martin, right? Or even Paula Inasano. But Paula Inasano is referred to as Si Mo because she is your teacher's wife outside of the art, right? Although she's not really outside of the art. So, Si Dai, Si Mui, and then there's the same thing. So there's Si Bak and Si Suk. So your Si Bak is your older uncle, right? So for my students, Chris Kent, who is my Si Hing, is their Si Bak. He is their older uncle, right? Joel Clark, who is Dan and Asano's current traveling assistant, Joel Clark is my Si Dai, my younger brother. So for my students, he is the Si Suk, right? I really should have printed all of this stuff out so that you guys could see what we're talking about. But anyhow, I just want to leave you with that little terminology lesson, right? There's more to it. You know, there's terms like the Daiji and the Munyan and what have you, and these refer to disciples, but that's where I've seen that is more now I'm starting to ramble, so it's time to close up. I've seen that in like Sifu Francis's Wing Chun Academy, right, where they used to have a list of the people who were accepted into the discipleship program, right? So anyhow, so that's it. Old school Jeet Kune Do, old school Gung Fu traditions, right? I hope you guys got something out of this, right? Thanks to everybody for tuning in and spending a few minutes with me. Be sure to check us out, Volume 1 of the Jeet Kune Do's Quick Skills series at ilovejeetkunዶ.com. Volume 2 is coming up, and that's about it, right? So I'll wrap this up. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, signing off. I'll see you guys again next week, same time, same JKD channel. Take care.